Hey, so guess what we're talking about? We're talking about learning. Learning isn't the acquisition of knowledge, or it can be, but in the psychological definition of learning, we're talking about the acquisition of new behavior. So, learning fears, learning behaviors. How do we change our behaviors? That is the type of learning that you're going to learn about. Operant conditioning is when a behavior is affected by the consequence of that behavior. So if I do something and something good happens, right, I'm probably going to do that more in the future. If I do something and something bad happens, I probably am going to stop that behavior. So when talking about these consequences, we can either talk about reinforcement, right, something that happens that causes a behavior to increase, or punishment, something that happens that causes a behavior to decrease. So let's say I was, I don't know, maybe making a series of video lectures for a psychology class, hypothetically. And as I'm making these lectures, no, maybe I put like cute animal pictures in the slides, and my students go, Professor Thompson, thank you so much. You're so great at being a teacher. You're the best teacher I've ever had. Here's $50. I just Venmoed you. I Venmoed you at your Venmo at Jeff, the professor, 1 2, right? And once again, that's Venmo at Jeff the Professor 1 2. I Venmoed you $50 because I was so thankful, right? I'm going to put cute animal pictures in the future because that behavior was reinforced. Now, if I have students who go, Professor Thompson, it's pretty unprofessional of you to distract us with cute animal photos. We're trying to learn about psychology, not zoology, okay? This isn't an animal studies class. I'd feel so guilty from that negative feedback that I'd be less likely to do that same behavior in the future. So when we're talking about reinforcement, sometimes I don't know why when I upload things, sometimes it doesn't just when I'm just gonna tell you this now in the slides, in the PowerPoint slides, in the PowerPoint file, all in one line. Reinforcement, all in one line. But for some reason, when I upload it, it doesn't want to be on one line. This is the worst thing that has happened to anyone in America all week. All week. When somebody listens to this 3 months from now, there's probably going to be something even worse than what's happening right now. And then they're going to go, Professor Thompson, you're kind of a jerk. That's okay. That's punishment. But we're going to talk about reinforcement. So there's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. One thing that's important to realize is that when we're talking about positive and negative, we're not talking about good or bad. Okay. So when we're talking about positive, we're saying that something is being added. When we're talking about negative, we're saying that something is being taken away. When we're talking about positive reinforcement, something is being added to a situation and that causes a behavior to continue. When we're talking about negative reinforcement, we're talking about how something is being taken away, but that still increases the behavior because it's still reinforcement. So if you were trying to figure out what type of operant conditioning is occurring, you'd want to look at what actually happens to the behavior, right? So if I have a student who is being disrespectful, so I take away their cell phone and I say, you better start being a better student. And they become more disrespectful. I haven't punished them. I thought I was punishing them, but I wasn't punishing them because the behavior increased, right? They were disrespectful. Now they're more disrespectful. I took something away and that increased a specific behavior. That's negative reinforcement. Now, if I have a student who is always helping other students and just being the greatest person in the world, and I say, hey, you're really awesome. Thank you for being you. And that praise that I give them causes them to do even more of what they were doing before, That's positive reinforcement. I added something and that increased the behavior. Let's say I have a terrible headache, right? And I'm, just, oh, this headache is so terrible. And I take a pill, right? And that pill removes my headache, right? So in the future, I'm going to take that pill. Now, you have to determine what is the behavior that is changing. The headache that I have is not actually the behavior, right? It's not a thing that is changing. It is a thing that's changing, but it's not the thing in me that's changing. The behavior that I'm doing, the actual action, is taking the headache medication because the next time I have a headache, I'm going to take that same medication because I know that it's going to remove my headache. So when we're talking about like medication, it's usually reinforced through negative reinforcement. If we're talking about drugs, it's usually reinforced sometimes through positive reinforcement, right? You want to like have a fun party and you take a little LSD as the kids are doing. You kids doing LSD still? Is that still a cool drug, right? And you have all these cool hallucinations, right? Everything feels weird and cool and the colors are so intense. That's adding something. So you go, I'm going to do that more in the future, right? And like, drugs are great, positive reinforcement. Or maybe you're feeling stressed, right? You've had a long day of class and work, and people didn't like your last Instagram post, and you're just stressed. So you smoke a little weed, and it makes some of that stress go away. So in the future, you're going to smoke a little bit more weed. That is negative reinforcement. Then there is punishment. Punishment can also be positive or negative. Reminder, positive means that you're adding something, not that it's good or bad. Negative means that you're taking something away. So the most common positive punishment that most people will think of is like yelling or hitting. So you have like a kid who's acting up, and then you grab him and you say, "No, don't do that, child," and then you smack him on the bum, right? That's positive punishment. Whatever that kid was doing, you're hoping that by doing that, they will do that behavior less. You're adding yelling, you're adding spanking, right, in order to decrease a specific behavior. Or sometimes you take something away from someone. So you might say, "Oh, you're going to act up? Well, you're not allowed to play Xbox for the rest of the week." That would be negative punishment. You're taking something away in order to decrease a specific behavior. So when we're looking at all of these types of operant conditioning, the first thing you want to do is identify the behavior that's changing in the target, right? So if I have somebody who is swearing all the time, maybe every time they swear, I make them put money in a swear jar. And so over time, they swear less. So the behavior that's changing is swearing. It's decreasing over time, so that would be, yeah, that's right, punishment. I'm just going to assume that you said punishment. I'm just going to assume that you were right. Now, what is happening in order for that behavior to change? They're putting money in a jar. That means that they're losing money every time they do the specific behavior, so it's negative punishment, right? If every time somebody swears, I just slap them across the face, it's positive punishment. Now, sometimes when people do something inappropriate, we accidentally reinforce the behavior. So maybe I have a student who says inappropriate stuff, and the entire class like laughs and like somebody sneaks them a high five. And I'm like, "Okay, you little jokester, that was funny, but don't do it again." And then I wink at them, right? I think that I'm giving them punishment by saying don't do it again, but I'm reinforcing it. The laughter is reinforcing it. It's going to happen again. In case you're wondering, out of the four of these, which is the best to do, positive reinforcement is actually the most effective form of operant conditioning. If you can take a specific behavior, a target behavior, and find ways to positively reinforce it, those types of things are going to last the longest. So sometimes what happens is you don't want to reinforce or punish something right when it happens, right? Sometimes it just takes too much time or effort or money. So, for example, like maybe you have a class and you want to make people participate more in class. So you offer candy or a pizza party. If the class gets a pizza party, every time somebody speaks up, that's a lot of pizza. You think you want that much pizza, but after you've had 3 pizza parties in one class, it's too much pizza. So sometimes what you want to do is reinforce or punish on a schedule. So there are 2 types of schedules. There are ratio schedules and there are interval schedules. Ratio schedules are when you reinforce or punish something after a certain number of occurrences have happened. Interval reinforcement or interval punishment is after a specific amount of time has passed. So ratio, we're talking about that behavior has occurred a certain number of times. Interval, time has passed. So let's get a little bit deeper into it because we can break up ratio and interval a little bit further. So we have fixed ratio, which is the idea that you're reinforcing or punishment or punishing something after a behavior happens a set number of times. So every 10 stellar questions that are asked by students will have a pizza party, right? You ask 10 really good questions during the semester. Every 10, you get a pizza party. 20, pizza party. 30, pizza party, right? But sometimes that fixed ratio might not be the best thing to do. Sometimes, some of those questions weren't super stellar. Sometimes there are some questions that are just so stellar you want to reinforce them right away. So you might want to do a variable ratio. So sometimes you get the pizza party after 17 great questions in class. Sometimes it's after 5, sometimes it's after 12, but the number of times it takes to get the reinforcement or punishment is going to vary from time to time. Interval is very similar. Sometimes you want to reinforce something after a behavior has happened for a period of time. So maybe I'm dating somebody and they're not great. So I say, look, we're gonna need to take a break from me cooking dinner because you cheat on me a lot, right? So if you can go an entire week without cheating on me, I will make you dinner, right? So after 7 days, I say, have you cheated? And they say, I have not. And I'm gonna, preheat that oven and start making some dinner, right? Now, I could do variable interval. So sometimes it's been 10 days since you cheated on me. If you can do it for another 2 days, we're getting dinner, right? Oh, but next time it's been 5 days and there was a sale at the grocery store. You're getting dinner. Maybe next time they have to wait a whole month without cheating on me. Also, just fun fact, don't date people to cheat on you. That's just a fun little professor fact for you. So let's say you're trying to develop a study plan, right? Shaping your own behavior once you understand these things is actually fairly easy. You can very immediately take these and apply these to your life. So let's say you were having trouble studying. You can go, well, do I want to punish myself or do I want to reinforce myself? right? I can reinforce myself for doing the behaviors that I'm supposed to do, or I can punish myself for doing the behaviors that I don't like doing. So maybe I need to read 100 pages in a textbook, right? So I sit down and I say I'm going to read, and then I tell myself every time I get distracted, I'm going to donate $10 to a political or a politician who I do not like, right? I'm going to donate straight to their campaign. Whew, negative punishment, right? I really don't want to do that behavior again. I don't want to get distracted and something's being taken away from me. Or I can say the instead I'm going to reinforce myself for the number of pages that I read, or I'll reinforce myself for the amount of time I spend reading. So depending on what like content you have, right? If it's biopsychology, it might take a little bit longer to read through a chapter. If it's like dreams and sleep, maybe that's more interesting to you. So you might want to do variable ratio, because if you're learning about the anatomy of the brain, 5 pages in, you might be ready for a reinforcement, right? You might give yourself a little cookie for every for maybe 5 pages, and then you read 7 pages, and then you get another cookie, right? That would be variable ratio. But if you did every 10 pages, you get the cookie, then it's fixed ratio. Maybe you still want to punish yourself, right? So you say, okay, I'm going to spend this day studying. If for every 10 minutes that I spend doing something that's not related to the actual like studying of the book, I'm going to donate $10 to that person who I hate so much. I'm going to donate to their political campaign, right? Or you could do variable interval, right? Because sometimes, it's okay to be distracted for a little while. So sometimes you punish yourself and donate $10 after 30 minutes of distraction, sometimes 12 minutes of distraction, sometimes 50 minutes of distraction, right? So those are ways that you can shape your behavior. Now, when we're talking about reinforcers, there are what are called primary and secondary reinforcers. When we're young, and this is related to our base analytic cells, we are reinforced directly by the things that are associated with survival, right? Babies cry because they need things from the environment. When we do things for crying babies, that is a form of negative reinforcement for us, right? We do something, we hold them, we change their diaper, and that removes the crying, right? For the baby, it's positive reinforcement, right? I do this behavior, I get what I want, I'm going to do it more in the future. If babies didn't get what they wanted when they cried, they would not cry. So uh, the basic reinforcements are food, sex, and water, these base things that we want. But sometimes things get associated with that, right? So if you see somebody who is single and is working a nice job and buys a nice car and has lots of money, the reason that they probably did that isn't simply because they, like having a nice car, but because in the base part of their brain, it's associated with getting sex. You have money, it's more likely, like if you are a celebrity, people tend to want to have sex with you, right? And that is a reinforcing thing. If you have not had sex, I've heard that it's a great thing. So Google it. I'm sure that there are websites that explain it and have diagrams. But that is all these things that we do are tied to these basic things: food, sex, water, survival. So I mentioned shaping. I used the term a little while ago. And shaping is just gradually changing an individual's behavior through conditioning, right? So if you think about how we learn to speak, babies talk not so great. Have you ever heard like a baby talk, right? They just go yeah, like babies are not great. They're no like they're just not great. They're adorable, just not great speakers. But what happens in that babbling, right, is eventually they'll stumble on a combination of sounds that makes their parents go crazy, right? So they'll go, and then their parents will go, oh, you said it, you said it, and then they'll cheer and they'll hold the baby and they'll like look at it and praise them, right? And then they get more reinforcement, like, okay, what did I do? What did I do in order to get that? I liked what happened, right? The people who feed me and make sure that I don't die were excited and they gave me attention. What did I do? And then, okay, it happened again, right? So that behavior gets shaped. And then we try to get them to do other things, right? We say, okay, you said mama. Can you say papa? Can you say Pikachu? Can you go outside and walk around so that we can hatch this egg in Pokemon Go? So we eventually shape. I hit the microphone. I'm so sorry. Just get so excited about operant conditioning. We gradually shape behavior. Or if you think about like dogs who learn really cool tricks, right? So the it starts with learning one behavior, then tying a behavior to that next behavior, and then you just reinforce the entire pattern of behavior. So the you get a dog to stand up, right? And the dog learns to stand on its hind legs, and then you make a little gun with your fingers and say bang, and then the dog leans back and falls to the ground, and then you teach it to go right? And those three together, you reinforce one behavior, then you reinforce another behavior, and as a whole, it becomes a whole chain of behaviors because you've reinforced multiple things. That's shaping behavior. Another type of learning is what's called classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning. It's called Pavlovian conditioning because it's associated with a guy named Pavlov. Now, Pavlov was studying salivation in dogs. Now, one thing that you should know about salivation is that it's a pretty automatic thing, right? When you're eating food, you salivate. It's part of the digestive process. You probably learned this in third grade, that in case you didn't know why your mouth was full of saliva, check it out. It's right there. It is because it helps you digest food. It's an automatic thing. If while you're eating, you have to think, K salivatory glands salivate, right? Something is seriously wrong with you. Please get that checked out. But it's an automatic thing. It's an unlearned behavior, right? So when we're looking at behaviors, we have stimuluses or stimuli and responses, right? One stimulus will cause one response. So let's say somebody hits me as hard as they can in my thigh, right? The stimulus is being hit in my leg. The response is pain. I don't have to learn that response. It's automatic, right? So that is what we call an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. It's automatic. In the same way, salivation is automatic. It's unconditioned. Now, in studying these dogs, Pavlov would bring them food and he'd ring a little dinner bell, right? Now, the dinner bell is just a random, unrelated thing. It's what's called a neutral stimulus, right? It's a thing that's neutral, it's unrelated to anything, and it doesn't elicit any response because it's not tied to anything. Now, If you are either looking at this photo, this one right here. Oh, that was a sloppy circle. Just ignore how sloppy that was. It'll fade away. My shame will fade away soon. But if you are looking at this, you're probably jumping forward to the part where eventually the ringing of the bell started making the dogs salivate, right? Now, bells aren't food, right? If I had a dog right now with me and I rang a bell or put the bell in the dog's mouth, the dog would not be happy because the bell is not food. A bell is metal. Sometimes it's a musical instrument, sometimes it's a way of signaling to people, but it's not food. So bells don't make dogs salivate. But dogs in this situation, Pavlov's situation, started salivating once they heard the bell. Why? That is correct. Just going to remind you that I'm not here with you. You just answered to no one, you weirdo. What are you doing talking to a phone or a computer screen, you weirdo? This isn't Zoom. Get out of here. Anyway, the bell, this neutral stimulus, became what's called a conditioned stimulus. Conditioned means learned, and the conditioned stimulus elicits now a conditioned response, salivation. So in Pavlovian conditioning, we have 5 parts. We have the thing that's automatic and unlearned, the unconditioned stimulus and response, right? You have food in your mouth, you salivate. Then you have something neutral. That neutral thing gets associated with a conditioned stimulus or the unconditioned stimulus, and then that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. So the neutral stimulus and the conditioned stimulus are always going to be the same thing. In this case, the bell. The conditioned response is what used to be the unconditioned response, right? So now the bell, the conditioned stimulus, elicits the conditioned response of salivation. Pavlov. So, just to go through it again, the unconditioned stimulus is the thing that it elicits a response without any prior learning. It's innate, it's automatic. No one had to teach it to you, it is just there. The unconditioned response is a response that does not have to be learned. It's like a reflex, right? Somebody hits you, you feel pain. Somebody blows towards your eye, you blink, right? Those are unconditioned responses. The neutral stimulus is something completely unrelated. The conditioned stimulus is the neutral stimulus that becomes associated with this unconditioned stimulus and response, and now elicits the conditioned response, which used to be the unconditioned response. This is when I mentioned the story of little Albert. Just to be quick, little Albert was a baby, and babies are cute, but easily scared. So there were these scientists, because this was like the 1930s or something, and scientists could just like walk into hospitals and like mess with babies if they wanted to. So scientists came in with like trumpets and vuvuzelas and like cymbals, and this cute baby who was just sleeping got jolted awake by this like garage band of scientists, right? So the baby, startled, does what babies do, or did what babies do when they get startled. What do babies do when they get startled? They. Did you say it out loud? I'm not here with you. I don't know if you're saying it or not. Don't say things out loud. You seem like you seem nonsensical to the people who are around you. Stop responding to me, okay? Thank you. So, this baby gets scared. Now, that's a very simple unconditioned stimulus and response. Loud sounds makes you scared and cry, right? Now, there was one researcher who had a very long white beard. Now, what ended up happening is when the baby saw the long white beard, which is a neutral stimulus, it started to cry. Poor, poor little Albert. Now, the long white beard was a conditioned stimulus, which would elicit the conditioned response of fear and crying. Sad thing about little Albert is some real cool nurse who happened to be working in the restaurant saw this baby that was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was like, I'm gonna get something nice for this baby, and bought little Albert a cute little stuffed white rabbit. And little Albert saw that white rabbit and he flipped out. He flipped out. Now, there was no traumatic incident with a white rabbit, but if you remember, the thing that triggered his fear in the first place was the scientist's long white beard. So even though, and a lot of you might know this, beards are not rabbits. Sometimes they are the same, but very rarely. It's a very thin line on that Venn diagram. Rabbits and beards are different things, but because both were white and fluffy, little Albert's mind did what's called stimulus generalization, which is when things like the conditioned stimulus elicit the conditioned response. I'll give you another example. I recently, what was that? Oh, I recently, I couldn't remember the traumatic thing that recently happened to me. So traumatic. That's what happens when it's that traumatic, you just forget. I recently got bit by a chihuahua, right? And chihuahuas are a certain type of dog. Not all dogs are chihuahuas, but all chihuahuas are dogs. And then I was hanging out with a friend who had a golden retriever, and I flipped out, right? I was like, get that mutt away from me. Now, this is the thing. You know this. You're very smart. Chihuahuas and golden retrievers, are they the same? No, that's right. I hope you said it out loud, you weirdo. Golden retrievers and chihuahuas are not the same. But in my mind, what happened was stimulus generalization. My mind went four legs, goes woof, right? Well, actually, one goes ruff, ruff, and the other one's like a roof, right? But my brain generalized that conditioned stimulus. So instead of just chihuahuas are bad, all dogs are bad, right? Or what could happen is I'm just afraid of small dogs, or specifically chihuahuas, or specifically that chihuahua, right? So when we're looking at classical conditioning, especially when we're talking about fears, we can now start to understand how fears develop. And there are lots of things that can develop through classical conditioning. Think about the fear of clowns. If you go to a birthday party and there's a clown, there's nothing unsettling about that, right? Some of you are disagreeing with me strongly right now, but if your first experience with a clown is at a birthday party, you're like, clowns are great, right? But what was a lot of people's first experience with a clown, or some people's most memorable experience with a clown? It could have been American Horror Story. It could have been Pennywise from It. Now, if a clown is trying to murder you, right, you're not afraid of clowns. You're afraid of getting murdered, which is a legitimate fear. Getting murdered is a scary thing. So that fear of getting murdered, which is not something you really need to learn, it's unconditioned, gets paired with the neutral stimulus of a clown. And now, suddenly, clowns are frightening, right? Being in a car is not scary. Once you've been in a car accident, that is scary. You're not afraid of cars. You're not afraid of driving. You're afraid of the specific incident associated with a car, right? Getting in a car accident, the fear that you feel is terrifying. Driving is associated with that fear. So, just a few more things related to classical conditioning. Sometimes these pairings that we have will extinguish themselves over time. So, yes, I was afraid of clowns. I almost said clouds. Yeah, whatever. I'm just going to stick with it. I was afraid of clouds for a long time. What are they doing up there? just watching us, and they just like drop rain on us. What's in the rain? What are you trying to hide, clouds? Why do you sometimes look like animals, right? So I was afraid of clouds for a very long time. But eventually, what happened is I went outside, I saw some clouds, they were pretty fluffy, and I wasn't afraid anymore. Sometimes that association that we make just gets extinguished over time. That's extinction. But sometimes what might happen is I haven't been afraid of clouds forever, but then one day I look out and I go, that cloud is up to something. That cloud is definitely up to something. And now I'm afraid of clouds again. That's what's referred to as spontaneous recovery. Now, when we're dealing with these fears, you can do what's called counter conditioning, right? So, I've recently been dating somebody and I'm very happy. And it's been 2.5 years and we are in love. That is a lie, but it's a really great example. Now, the, now I'm afraid of clouds, but I really love this person, right? And so we go on a picnic and we're cuddling and putting food in each other's mouths because I think that's what people do when they go on dates. They just put food in each other's mouths and laugh, right? And I'm having a great time. But clouds are also there, which I'm afraid of. What could happen is what's called counter conditioning. The fact that I'm associating something that I'm afraid of with something that I really enjoy is going to make that thing less scary in my brain, right? If I'm afraid of heights, but I'm, going skydiving with my friends, it's a little less scary. So if you have a fear, try associating it with something that you really enjoy. The worst thing that could happen is that you ruin a thing that you love for the rest of your life. So there are a few psychological disorders that can be explained with classical conditioning. So we talked about fears, so obviously phobias and panic disorder, right? Certain things can be associated with anxiety or fear, and that's when we talk about triggers, right? So let's say I am afraid of bees. I see a bee, or I maybe see like one of those hives. Sometimes you'll just see the hive. You'll be like, oh, gross, right? Or somebody's wearing like a striped yellow and black shirt. Something triggers that association, right? And that could be triggered because of stimulus generalization. And so that triggers a panic attack, or it triggers that fear response. Post-traumatic stress disorder is very similar. So maybe I was robbed at gunpoint, or I was present while a gang shooting happened, right? And so now, hearing gunfire, pretty scary. It's if you're not used to it, it's a very overwhelming thing to hear. Now, there are lots of things that can sound very similar to that. That's why for a lot of people, the 4th of July is a very traumatic time because fireworks can sound like explosions. Or if you're just popping popcorn, right? Certain things can trigger those memories that are associated with very specific and traumatic episodes in your life. Paraphilias are often referred to as fetishes. There's a whole speech I can give on those, but when we're talking about specific fetishes, right, like a foot fetish, when you're looking at how those things develop, usually what happens is some object or some specific part of the body becomes associated with sexual arousal. So maybe you were a young child and you were watching porn, and like based off of how the camera was positioned, there were a lot of feet in your view, right? And you just kept on seeing a lot of feet. In your mind, feet are now associated with sexual arousal. So, in order to become sexually aroused, you need to see feet. Or when you see feet, you become sexually aroused. So, a lot of things that we see in psychology, fears, paraphilia, post traumatic stress disorder, can be explained with classical conditioning. So here's a very terrible image of a child punching what's called a Bobo doll. I don't know why, when it got uploaded, it decided to not work, but technology is a cruel mistress sometimes. But there's this thing, in case you've never seen one before, called a Bobo doll, and it's basically an inflatable doll painted like a clown that has a weighted base. So if you like push it, it will rock back towards you. Now, uh, if you've never seen one before and you play with it, you'll push it and then you'll see that it rocks back and forth. But what some scientists decided to test is to see if they can influence how children played with the Bobo doll. So they would let the children play with the Bobo doll, put them in the room, and they would show an adult playing with the Bobo doll. And the adult would always be like very violent with the Bobo doll. And it was like the 50s, so they would say, "Hey, smart Alec, why don't you come over here and I'll give you what's what." And then you'd see the kid later play, "Hey, smart Alec, why don't you come over here?" And that's how kids talk in my head. So the what we're seeing is modeling, right? Children and all of us behave based off of how we see others behave. This is also related to the idea of observational learning. We change and learn new behaviors or alter our current behaviors after seeing other people engage in a specific behavior. So we can talk about like hand washing behavior, right? You go to the bathroom and you see somebody washing their hands for 20 minutes, 20 seconds or 20 minutes, whatever. And you do like you turn on the faucet, you like splash the water, and then you go just like shake your hands and then you're like done. You might go, oh, maybe I should at least like put like a little bit of soap and rub my hands, together, get those thumbs, get between the fingers because we change our behavior based off of what we see others do. There's also the idea of vicarious conditioning, which is when we change our behaviors based off of seeing other people be punished or rewarded for specific behavior, right? So if you think about think about this. How did I learn how to become a teacher, right? Some of you might go, well, you went to teacher school. There's no such thing. You can't just go to school to become a teacher. Who would teach those people? Crazy. But one thing that I learned, or one way that I learned how to be a teacher, is by watching other teachers teach, right? I was a student once, and I would see other teachers get chewed up by their students and get like terrible reviews and hear people say like that person is terrible, they don't listen, they never answer questions, they never respond to emails, they're always so mean, right? And I would say, ooh, if I'm ever a teacher, I don't want to do that. And then I'd also see teachers who were loved by their students, and they would, respond to emails in a timely manner. They would bring some humor to the classroom. They would just, generally not be a terrible human being. And then I will go, people like when that person does that, so I'm going to do the same thing. I also learned how to be a teacher based off of operant conditioning, right? Certain things that I did were punished. Certain things that I did were reinforced. I make a joke, people laugh, I'm going to do that more, right? I say something completely off color, and then the students go, oh boy, Professor Thompson, that was too much. Don't do that, bro. Not cool. Then I go, okay, I'm not going to do that. I apologize. There's also Pavlovian conditioning involved, right? There are certain things that are involved in teaching, right? Maybe social anxiety. It is sometimes very difficult to keep somebody's attention for a long time, and you worry about that. But the more you do it, you can be counter conditioned, right? You enjoy it so much that the fear of doing it starts to subside. So we can learn behaviors through a number of ways: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, modeling, observational learning, vicarious conditioning, and that is how we learn. I accidentally hit my computer as I was trying to find the pause button, and I still can't find it. So it's just going to be really, I was trying to end very strong, but it's just going to end